Story number 1. The Unopenable Door. I never intended to leave the chaos of city life behind, but desperation has a way of steering you down paths you never thought you'd tread. The relentless noise, the never-ending deadlines, and the suffocating concrete jungle had worn me down. When the opportunity arose to purchase an old wooden house in the remote wilderness of Alaska, I seized it without a second thought. It was a chance to find peace, to reconnect with nature, and to escape the relentless pace of urban living. The house stood solitary on the edge of a vast, frozen landscape, its weathered timber walls blending seamlessly with the surrounding pines. The sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered ground, and the crisp, biting air filled my lungs as I approached. There was something undeniably haunting about the place, a sense of history and solitude that both comforted and unnerved me. Inside, the house was just as I had imagined, quaint, with a sturdy stone fireplace and large windows that offered panoramic views of the wilderness. The previous owner had long since departed, leaving behind remnants of a life once lived, old photographs, dusty books, and an air of melancholy that seemed to permeate every room. Despite its age, the house was structurally sound, promising a safe haven from the elements outside. But there was one door that defied all logic, the front door to the basement. No matter how many times I tried, how many keys I used, it remained firmly locked, as if guarding a secret it was never meant to reveal. The house had only one key, which the seller assured me was the master key. But despite my efforts, the door refused to budge. I shrugged it off, attributing the stubbornness to the old lock or perhaps the chill that permeated the structure. The first few weeks were blissful. I settled into a routine, spending my days exploring the surrounding forest, cataloging wildlife, and immersing myself in the tranquility that only such isolation can provide. Nights were spent by the fireplace, reading books and enjoying the simplicity of life away from the city's demands. Yet, beneath the surface of this peaceful existence, an undercurrent of unease began to weave its way into my nights. It started subtly, a creak in the floorboards, shadows that seemed to dance just beyond the reach of the firelight, and the occasional whisper carried on the wind. I dismissed these as the natural sounds of an old house settling or my imagination running wild in the solitude. But as the days turned into weeks, the disturbances grew more frequent and unsettling. One particularly cold night, as the wind howled outside and snow piled higher against the windows, I sat alone in the living room, engrossed in a book. The silence was comforting until it was broken by a soft, persistent tapping sound. It emanated from the direction of the basement door, the one that had refused to open since day one. My heart raced as I listened, the tapping growing louder and more deliberate. I approached the door cautiously, flashlight in hand, trying to peer into the darkness beyond. But the basement remained impenetrable, the door mocking my attempts with its steadfast refusal to open. The tapping ceased as abruptly as it had started, leaving behind a heavy silence that pressed in on me from all sides, trying to shake off the unease. I returned to my book, but sleep eluded me that night. The tapping had awakened a primal fear within me, a sense that something was watching, waiting just beyond the door. I decided to confront it the following day, determined to uncover the source of these strange occurrences. The next morning, armed with tools and renewed determination, I made another attempt to open the basement door. Hours passed with no success. Frustration mounted as I tried every method at my disposal. But the door remained immovable. Exhausted and defeated, I sat down, trying to rationalize the situation. Perhaps it was best to leave it alone, to accept that some doors are better left closed. But fate had other plans. That night, as the house was enveloped in darkness, the tapping returned, softer this time, almost a whisper. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the sounds seeping into my consciousness. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably, the air growing thick with an unexplainable chill. I pulled the blankets tighter around me, my mind racing with questions and fear. As midnight approached, The tapping intensified, transforming into a frantic pounding that echoed through the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I rose from bed, the urge to investigate overpowering my fear. Grabbing my flashlight, I approached the basement door once more, each step heavy with dread. Before I could reach the door, it swung open with a force that sent a shiver down my spine. Cold air rushed out, carrying with it the faint sound of mournful whispers. I froze, staring into the abyss of darkness that had always kept its secrets hidden. The door slammed shut behind me, plunging the house into silence once more. Desperate to understand what was happening, I summoned the courage to step into the basement. The air was frigid, the darkness pressing in from all sides. My flashlight flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the room. The basement was cluttered with old furniture and forgotten belongings. But there was nothing out of the ordinary until I noticed the walls. Etched into the wooden beams were strange symbols and drawings, intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. My breath caught in my throat as I realized these markings were not random. They were deliberate, a language lost to time and memory. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me, filling the room with a haunting melody of sorrow and despair. A sudden gust of wind extinguished my flashlight, plunging me into complete darkness. Panic surged through me as the temperature plummeted further, my breath visible in the icy air. I fumbled to relight the flashlight, but the light only returned to reveal a figure standing at the far end of the basement. It was a woman, her clothes tattered and worn, her eyes hollow and devoid of life. She stared at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold, her presence both beautiful and terrifying. The air thickened with a palpable sense of anguish as she began to move toward me, each step deliberate and sorrowful. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fear and anger. She paused, her form wavering like mist in the cold air. "They are coming," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo that reverberated through the basement. I took a step back, my mind racing to comprehend her words. "Who are you? What do you want?" Her gaze bore into mine, the red eyes burning with an otherworldly light. "Help us," she pleaded, her voice filled with a sorrow that seemed to reach into the deepest corners of my soul. Before I could respond, the symbols on the walls began to glow, their red hues intensifying until the entire basement was bathed in a sinister light. The whispers transformed into screams of agony, filling the space with a cacophony of pain and desperation. The woman reached out her hand, her fingers trembling with an unspoken plea. Desperation took hold as I realized the true horror of the situation. I was standing on sacred ground, a place of torment and lost souls trapped in an eternal cycle of suffering. The basement door slammed shut again, trapping me inside as the oppressive presence closed in around me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I backed away from the woman, my heart pounding in my chest. "I can't help you," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "I have to leave." But the basement was relentless, the shadows closing in, suffocating me with their dark embrace. The woman's form began to fade, her sorrowful eyes still locked onto mine. "Don't ignore the warnings," she whispered, her voice fading into the darkness as she disappeared completely. The symbols on the walls dimmed, the basement returning to its previous state of eerie calm. I stood there, trembling, trying to steady my racing heart. The door, which had been open moments before, was now locked tight, sealing me in with the dark secrets of the past. Days turned into weeks as I grappled with the reality of what had happened. Sleep eluded me, my nights filled with nightmares of shadows and whispers, of a woman trapped in eternal torment. The basement door remained immovable, a constant reminder of the horrors that lay just beyond the surface of this secluded sanctuary. Unable to bear the weight of the fear and the unanswered questions, I made the decision to sell the house. It was a painful choice, but the thought of staying there, trapped in a perpetual state of fear, was unbearable. I listed the property, hoping to pass on the burden to someone else, someone who might find solace where I could not. The sale was swift, the house finding a new owner without much interest or scrutiny. As I watched the keys being handed over, a sense of relief washed over me, mixed with a lingering sense of dread. I left the house behind, but the memory of that night and the haunting presence of the woman in the basement stayed with me, a ghost that refused to let go. Years have passed since I left the old wooden house in Alaska, but the experience remains etched into my memory. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right and the shadows lengthen in the corners of my mind, I hear the faint echoes of whispers and the sorrowful cries of lost souls. The unopenable door stands as a testament to the darkness that can linger in the most unexpected places, a reminder that some secrets are meant to remain buried, and some doors are better left closed. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remote wilderness, seeking solitude and peace, heed this warning. Respect the boundaries of the unknown. Honor the memories of those who came before, and tread carefully, for in the heart of isolation, amidst the silent whispers and frozen shadows, there lie stories of sorrow and despair, waiting to claim those who dare to uncover their secrets. Story number 2. The Ghost in the Photograph. I never planned on leaving the comfort of my laboratory, but when the opportunity arose to join a team of fellow biologists on an expedition to study the elusive wildlife of Alaska, couldn't resist. The promise of untouched landscapes and the thrill of discovery were too enticing to pass up. Little did I know, the true discovery awaited me in the shadows of an abandoned wooden house perched on the edge of a frozen lake. The journey to our research site was arduous, winding through dense forests blanketed in snow and over rugged terrain that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. Our team consisted of 5: myself, Dr. Emily Carter, Dr. Ryan Mitchell, Sarah Thompson, and Mike Davis. Each of us was an expert in our respective fields, united by a common passion for understanding the mysteries of nature. Upon arrival, the sight of the house took my breath away. It stood solitary by the frozen lake, its weathered wood siding blending seamlessly with the surrounding pines. The structure was a relic from a bygone era, likely abandoned for decades. Its windows were grimy, the glass frosted over, and the door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the biting wind. "We should set up our equipment here," Emily suggested, her voice filled with excitement. "This location offers a perfect vantage point for observing the wildlife around the lake." We spent the first day unpacking and establishing our base camp inside the house. The interior was sparse but functional, with a large stone fireplace at one end and a few old, worn-out pieces of furniture scattered around. Despite its dilapidated state, the house provided a sturdy shelter against the harsh Alaskan winter. As night fell, the temperature plummeted, and the wind howled outside, rattling the windows and causing the house to groan under the strain. We huddled around the fireplace, sharing stories and planning our research schedule for the coming days. The ambience was cozy, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that enveloped the surrounding wilderness. Around midnight, as the fire crackled and the room was bathed in its warm glow, Sarah decided to take some photographs of the snowfall outside. "I want to capture the beauty of the night," she said, pulling out her camera. "Go ahead," I replied, intrigued by her dedication. "It's a perfect setting." She ventured to the window, adjusting her camera settings to capture the intricate patterns of the falling snow. I watched her for a moment before returning to my book, the silence of the night settling comfortably around me. But that peace was short-lived. A sharp tapping sound echoed through the house, emanating from the front door. We all froze, exchanging uneasy glances. "Probably just the wind," Mike said, attempting to reassure us, but his voice lacked conviction. Emily stood up, her curiosity piqued. "I'll go check it out," she volunteered, pulling on her coat. "Be careful," Ryan cautioned, concern etched on his face. Emily nodded and approached the door, her steps tentative. As she reached out to pull it open, the tapping intensified, transforming from a gentle rapping into a frantic pounding. She hesitated for a moment before swinging the door wide, revealing nothing but the swirling snow and the empty expanse of the lake beyond. "No one there," she murmured, stepping back inside. It was just the wind, but the damage was done. A sense of unease settled over us, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. We decided to dismiss it as our imagination, the isolation and the harsh environment playing tricks on our minds. Yet, as we tried to resume our activities, another unsettling sight caught my attention. Earlier that night, Sarah had taken a series of photographs of the snowfall around the house. Curiosity led me to review them the next morning. Most of the images were stunning, capturing the pristine beauty of the winter landscape. But one photograph stood out there. In the midst of the falling snow was a shadowy figure dressed in an old, tattered fur coat, standing motionless by the edge of the lake. "Do you guys see this?" I asked, showing the photograph to the group. They gathered around, examining the image closely. "It looks like someone was standing there when the photo was taken," Ryan observed, his brow furrowed. "But who?" Emily questioned, her voice tinged with worry. "We don't know anyone else around here." We scoured the area, searching for any sign of another person, but found nothing. The lake was vast, and the snow had erased any footprints that might have been left behind. The figure remained an enigma, his presence unsettling yet inexplicable. That night, the tapping returned, more persistent than before. This time, it seemed to come from the basement, a part of the house we had avoided, deeming it unnecessary for our research. The basement was dark and foreboding, filled with old storage boxes and forgotten belongings. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows that danced ominously on the walls. "We need to check it out," Mike declared, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his eyes. Reluctantly, we descended the creaky wooden stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was musty, the smell of damp wood and mildew heavy in the air. As we approached the far end, the tapping ceased, replaced by a faint, sorrowful humming that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "Do you hear that?" Emily whispered, her eyes wide with fear, before anyone could respond. The temperature dropped drastically, our breaths visible in the icy air. Suddenly, the humming intensified, and a shadowy figure materialized before us. It was a woman, her hair disheveled and her clothing tattered, the very same old fur coat seen in Sarah's photograph. Her eyes were hollow, devoid of pupils, staring directly at us with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "Please," she whispered, her voice echoing through the basement. "Help me." Frozen with fear, we could only watch as she slowly reached out a hand toward us, her fingers trembling with an unspoken plea. "Don't leave me here," she continued, her voice breaking. "They are coming." With a collective gasp, we turned to flee, scrambling up the stairs and out of the basement. The door slammed shut behind us, plunging the house back into silence. We huddled together, trying to make sense of the apparition we had just witnessed. The following morning, determination replaced fear. We delved into the local archives, uncovering the tragic history of the house. Turned out that decades ago, a woman named Margaret Whitaker had lived there with her family, an avid hunter and respected member of the community. Margaret was beloved by all who knew her, but one harsh winter, tragedy struck. The entire family vanished without a trace, leaving behind the house that still stood as a silent witness to their disappearance. Rumors spread that Margaret had been the sole survivor, driven mad by the isolation and the relentless cold. Some said she had taken her own life, while others whispered of darker forces at play, entities that thrived on fear and despair. Armed with this newfound knowledge, we returned to the house, hoping to lay Margaret's spirit to rest. That night, as the wind howled outside and the snow fell in heavy sheets, we set out to create a makeshift memorial in the basement. Candles were placed around the apparition's favorite hunting spots, and we offered prayers for her soul's peaceful transition. As midnight approached, the atmosphere in the house grew heavy once more. The basement door creaked open, and Margaret's ghost appeared, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. She looked around the memorial, a faint smile touching her lips before she began to fade, her presence dissipating like mist in the morning sun. For a moment, peace settled over the house, the oppressive weight lifting as if a dark cloud had been dispelled. Exhausted but hopeful, we retired for the night, believing that our efforts had finally given Margaret the closure she so desperately needed. But as dawn broke, the serenity was shattered. We found Sarah missing, her belongings untouched but her absence undeniable. Panic set in as we scoured the house, calling out her name with no response. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the lingering echo of her laughter. Desperate to find answers, we revisited the basement, hoping to uncover any clues about Sarah's disappearance. But all we found were fresh footprints leading into the dense forest surrounding the house, the snow disturbed by large, unfamiliar prints that led away from our home and vanished into the wilderness. The realization hit us hard. Margaret's presence had not been fully appeased. Her sorrow had turned into something darker, a malevolent force that now sought to claim more lives, driven by an insatiable hunger for companionship in her eternal solitude. As night fell once more, the whispers returned, more urgent and desperate. The laughter of our missing friend echoed through the halls, mingling with the sorrowful cries of Margaret's spirit. The house seemed to come alive with a sinister energy, the shadows lengthening and twisting into grotesque shapes that reached out to ensnare us. "We have to leave," Ryan urged, his voice filled with fear. "This place is cursed." But the house resisted our attempts to escape, the doors and windows refusing to budge, trapping us in a nightmare of our own making. The snowstorm outside intensified, the wind tearing through the house with a ferocity that seemed almost sentient, tearing at the very fabric of reality. In a final, desperate act, we gathered our courage and faced the haunting forces that now held us captive. "We won't let you take us," I declared, my voice trembling but resolute. "We came here for peace, not to be tormented." But our defiance was met with a chilling silence, broken only by the haunting laughter that reverberated through the house. The shadows closed in, the air thick with the presence of restless spirits yearning for release. As the first light of dawn broke through the storm, the house stood silent once more, the snow covering the traces of our struggle. We were gone, swallowed by the very place we had sought refuge in, our fates forever entwined with the tragic history of the hunter's house. Years have passed since that fateful expedition, but the legend of the house by Lake Frostbite endures, a cautionary tale whispered among adventurers and locals alike. Some say the spirits of Margaret and the lost souls still linger, their presence felt in the howling winds and the silent snowfall, forever seeking the peace that eluded them in life. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remote corners of Alaska, heed this warning. Respect the boundaries of the unknown. Honor the memories of those who came before, and tread carefully, for in the heart of the frozen wilderness, shadows linger, whispers echo, and malevolent forces wait to claim those who dare to uncover their secrets. Story number 3. Whispers on the ice. I never planned to leave the city, but the noise, the endless grind, it all became too much. When I stumbled upon the listing for a secluded wooden house beside Lake Frostbite in Alaska, felt like destiny. The promise of silence, of isolation, was exactly what I needed. Little did I know, the isolation would bring more than just peace. It would awaken ancient horrors that lingered beneath the icy surface. The journey to Lake Frostbite was arduous, winding through dense forests and over rugged terrain. As the cityscape gave way to towering pines and vast expanses of snow, a sense of calm settled over me. The house stood alone at the water's edge, its wooden frame sturdy against the harsh Alaskan winter. Frost clung to the windows, and smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a sign of life in the desolate wilderness. Inside, the house was charming yet weathered, filled with the scent of pine and the faint aroma of burning wood from the fireplace. The previous tenant had left behind remnants of a life once lived: old photographs, books, and a sturdy cast-iron stove. It was perfect. I spent the first few days acclimating, exploring the surrounding area, and immersing myself in the tranquil beauty that only nature could offer. But as the days shortened and the nights grew longer, an unsettling presence began to make itself known. It started with the whispers. First, I dismissed them as the wind, rustling through the trees and howling against the sturdy walls of the house. But the whispers grew more distinct, more insistent. They seemed to emanate from the very walls, voices of sorrow and despair that echoed through the silent nights. One particularly cold evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness enveloped the landscape, I sat by the fireplace, reading a book to distract myself from the eerie sounds. The temperature plummeted, and a biting chill filled the room despite the roaring fire. The whispers began again, softer this time, almost pleading. I tried to focus on my book, but the voices grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony of mournful cries. I glanced toward the window, where the wind whipped snow into frenzied patterns, obscuring the view of the frozen lake. That's when I saw her, a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the ice, staring directly at me with hollow eyes that seemed to burn with an unnatural intensity. My heart raced as I approached the window, straining to see through the swirling snowstorm. The figure remained still, its presence both mesmerizing and terrifying. I reached out to touch the glass, hoping for some rational explanation, but my fingers met only the cold, hard surface. The figure began to move, slowly advancing across the ice, leaving no footprints in its wake. Terrified, I backed away from the window, my mind racing to understand what I was witnessing. The whispers intensified, merging with the haunting silence of the night, filling the house with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. The next morning, I sought answers. I visited the local library in the nearest town, a small outpost where everyone knew each other's names and stories. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, listened intently as I recounted my experiences. "The house by Lake Frostbite," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was the home of Eleanor Blackwood. She was a solitary woman, known for her reclusive nature and her deep connection to the lake. 5 years ago, she vanished without a trace. Some say she was lost to the wilderness, but others believe something far more sinister took her." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Did anyone ever find her?" Mrs. Thompson shook her head slowly. "No one knows what happened, but there have been reports of strange occurrences around the lake, whispers in the night, shadows moving across the ice, and those who've stayed in the house have reported seeing Eleanor's spirit." Unable to move on, I thanked her and left the library, the weight of her words heavy on my shoulders. That night, armed with newfound knowledge, I decided to confront the presence haunting my home. I sat by the fireplace once more, the room dimly lit by the flickering flames. The whispers returned, growing louder, more desperate. I stood up, determination replacing fear, and approached the window. The snowstorm had subsided, leaving the lake eerily still under the pale light of the moon. "Eleanor," I called out, my voice trembling but resolute. "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" The whispers ceased, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I peered out into the darkness, searching for any sign of her. Suddenly, the surface of the lake began to shimmer, and the shadowy figure reappeared, this time closer, its eyes piercing through the night. "I can't leave," she whispered, her voice filled with an eternal sorrow. "I'm trapped here, unable to find peace." I felt a surge of empathy, mixed with fear. "What can I do to help you?" The figure began to move towards me, its form becoming more defined as it approached the window. I reached out a hand, my fingers inches from the glass. "I want to help you. Tell me what I need to do." As I spoke, The whispers returned, swirling around me like a tangible force. Images flashed before my eyes, visions of Eleanor's life, her loneliness, and the tragic night she vanished. I saw her standing by the lake, her face twisted in anguish as something unseen dragged her into the ice. "You must help me find my remains," the whispers urged, guiding my thoughts. Only then can I move on, determined to set her spirit free. I knew what I had to do. I gathered my gear and ventured out into the night, the frozen landscape stretching endlessly before me. The moon cast a ghostly glow over the ice, illuminating the path I needed to take. The journey to the center of the lake was treacherous, the ice thin and brittle beneath my feet. My breath formed clouds in the frigid air as I navigated the slippery terrain, following the trail of whispers that guided me forward. The stillness was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of my boots and the distant howl of the wind. As I reached the heart of the lake, I noticed a small island, partially submerged in ice. It was there that Eleanor had met her tragic end. I set up my equipment, determined to locate her remains and give her the closure she so desperately needed. Hours passed in tense silence, the only sounds the gentle lapping of the water and the distant calls of nocturnal wildlife. Just as fatigue began to set in, my metal detector beeped, signaling the presence of something buried beneath the ice. I knelt down, hands trembling, and began to dig. The ice beneath me was unforgiving, each movement a battle against the biting cold and the deep layers of snow. Finally, my fingers brushed against something solid. I carefully unearthed the object, revealing a small, ornate box. My heart raced as I opened it, finding Eleanor's locket inside, her final keepsake. Now frozen and broken, tears welled in my eyes as I realized the significance of this discovery. I knew I had to return to the house and give her locket a proper burial, to honor her memory and allow her spirit to find peace. The return journey was fraught with an eerie sense of calm, as if the lake itself was holding its breath. When I finally reached the shore, the whispers had ceased, replaced by a serene stillness that enveloped the landscape. I carried the locket back to the house, the weight of my mission heavy on my shoulders. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. The oppressive presence was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of release. I set up a small altar by the fireplace, placing the locket among candles and flowers I had gathered from the surrounding forest. "Eleanor," I whispered, holding the locket in my hands, "I've found your remains. May you finally find peace." As the flames flickered, the room was filled with a gentle warmth, and a soft glow emanated from the altar. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, the whispers replaced by a soothing silence. It was as if Eleanor's spirit had been freed from her eternal torment, leaving behind a legacy of sorrow and redemption. The following morning, I awoke to a beautiful sunrise, the first light of day casting a golden hue over the frozen lake. The house felt lighter, the oppressive cold replaced by a warm, welcoming atmosphere. I stepped outside, breathing in the crisp, clean air, and looked out over the serene waters. There was no sign of Eleanor's spirit, no lingering whispers or shadowy figures, only the peaceful beauty of nature, unmarred by the tragedies of the past. I knew that my actions had made a difference, that I had played a part in freeing a lost soul from her eternal prison. But the experience left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. The whispers in the wind, the shadows on the ice, they were no longer signs of fear, but echoes of a story that needed to be told. A tale of sorrow, redemption, and the enduring power of compassion. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remote wilderness of Alaska, heed this warning. Respect the boundaries of the unknown. Honor the memories of those who came before, and tread carefully, for in the heart of the frozen expanse, there are whispers that linger, shadows that watch, and spirits that seek peace in the silence of the night. Story number 4. Laughter in the snow. I never imagined that a weekend getaway with friends would turn into a nightmare etched into my memory forever. But here I am, recounting the harrowing events that unfolded when we decided to escape the chaos of our everyday lives and spend a few days in the remote wilderness of Alaska. It was late October when Jake, Emily, Sarah, Mike, and I planned our trip. We were a tight-knit group, bonded by years of friendship and a shared love for adventure. The idea was simple: rent a cozy wooden cabin on the outskirts of Fairbanks, Alaska, and immerse ourselves in the untouched beauty of the wilderness. The cabin, though modest, promised solitude and a break from the relentless pace of city life. The drive there was long and arduous, winding through dense forests and across vast expanses of snow-covered land. As we approached the cabin, the towering pines loomed like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with the weight of impending winter. The cabin stood alone, its weathered wood blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. It looked inviting, a perfect sanctuary for our planned retreat. The first day passed without incident. We settled in, unpacked our gear, and ventured out to explore the pristine landscape. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the distant sound of a river cutting through the mountains. We spent our afternoons hiking, capturing photos of the breathtaking scenery, and enjoying each other's company around the fireplace as night fell. But as dusk gave way to night, an unsettling feeling began to creep into the cabin. It started with the wind, howling through the trees with an almost sentient fury. The shadows cast by the flickering firelight seemed to dance and stretch unnaturally, creating an eerie ambience that none of us could quite shake off. On the second night, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. We had dinner in the main room, sharing stories and laughter, trying to push away the creeping unease. Afterward, we decided to split up to make the most of our time. Emily and Sarah headed out for a midnight hike, while Jake, Mike, and I stayed behind to tend to the fire and finish packing. It was around midnight when the laughter began. At first, it was faint, soft, distant giggles that seemed to emanate from deep within the forest. We thought it might be the wind playing tricks on our ears, or perhaps wildlife moving through the trees. But the laughter persisted, growing louder and more distinct, echoing through the silent night. Curiosity and concern got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and ventured out, calling out to see if Emily and Sarah were all right. The snow crunched under my boots as I made my way toward the source of the sound. The laughter seemed to come from all directions, weaving through the dense trees like an invisible thread. As I approached a clearing, the laughter intensified, now unmistakably human and filled with a haunting quality. I scanned the area, my heart pounding in my chest, but saw nothing, no sign of my friends, no footprints in the fresh snow, just the endless expanse of white and the oppressive silence that followed the laughter. "Emily? Sarah?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The laughter responded, mocking and taunting, sending chills down my spine. I turned to head back, but something caught my eye, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by the swirling snow. I froze, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The figure was tall and gaunt, its features indistinct in the storm's fury. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring at me with eyes that seemed to burn with an unnatural intensity. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I stood rooted to the spot, terror gripping me as the figure began to take a step forward. Panic surged through me. I turned and fled back toward the cabin, the laughter following me like a relentless specter. My breath came in ragged gasps, each step heavier than the last. I could feel eyes watching me, their presence suffocating, as the forest seemed to close in around me. When I finally burst back into the cabin, I found Jake and Mike staring at me with wide, fearful eyes. "What was that?" Jake demanded, his voice shaky. I couldn't find the words. The fear in my chest was overwhelming, a black hole that swallowed any attempt at rational thought. "I saw someone," I finally managed to stammer. "A man, or something like him, watching us." Mike frowned, his expression a mix of skepticism and concern. "Maybe it's a hunter or someone lost in the storm," but Jake shook his head. a sense of foreboding settling over him. It felt different, like it wasn't human. We tried to convince ourselves it was just our imagination, the stress of the trip playing tricks on our minds. But as the night wore on, the laughter returned, louder and more insistent. It was impossible to ignore, a constant reminder that something was very wrong. The following morning, we awoke to a scene of horror. Emily was missing. Panic set in as we searched the cabin and the surrounding area, calling out her name with no response. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the lingering echo of her laughter. Desperation led us to the edge of the forest, where we found a trail of footprints leading into the dense woods. The tracks were large, leaving deep impressions in the snow that were impossible to explain. Blood was smeared along the path, faint but unmistakable, painting a grim picture of what had happened. "We have to find her," Jake insisted, his voice tinged with fear. "We can't leave her out there alone." We followed the trail, the forest around us eerily silent except for the crunch of our boots and the distant howling wind. The footprints led us deeper into the woods, where the trees grew thicker and the darkness seemed to press in on all sides. The laughter still echoed, now a haunting chorus that seemed to follow our every step. Hours passed with no sign of Emily, the snow piling higher and obscuring our vision. Exhaustion set in, but we pushed forward, driven by the hope of finding our friend. Just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest, we stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood Emily's jacket, half buried in the snow, the once vibrant fabric now dulled by the harsh winter elements. My heart sank as we approached, the blood stains more prominent, leading to a gaping hole in the ground. It was a pit, dark and foreboding, with twisted branches hanging from the edges like skeletal fingers. "Look," Mike pointed, his voice barely audible. "It's like she was dragged down here." Before we could react, the air grew colder, the laughter intensifying into a cacophony of mocking sounds. The shadows in the clearing seemed to move, coalescing into the shape of the figure we had seen the night before. It stood at the edge of the pit, its red eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. "They're coming," Jake whispered, recalling the last words from the hunter's journal we had found weeks earlier. That's what it said. Fear and determination battled within us as we faced the horrifying reality. We had stumbled upon something ancient and evil, a presence that thrived on fear and suffering. The figure began to move toward us, the laughter now a deafening roar that drowned out our thoughts. "We need to get out of here," I urged, my voice shaking. "Now." But the forest around us seemed to shift, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes, blocking our path and trapping us in the clearing. The ground beneath our feet felt alive, pulsating with a dark energy that made it impossible to move freely. Suddenly, Emily emerged from the shadows, her eyes hollow and devoid of life. She stood beside us, her presence a haunting reminder of what we were up against. But it wasn't Emily. Something else had taken her place, a twisted version of our friend consumed by the darkness. "Don't leave us," the figure whispered, its voice a chilling blend of sorrow and rage. "Join us in eternal silence." Desperation took hold as we realized there was no escape. The presence around us tightened its grip, the laughter turning into cries of anguish that pierced our souls. We were trapped, victims of a malevolent force that thrived on our fear and despair. In a final, desperate attempt to survive, we gathered our remaining strength and confronted the figure. "We're not going to let you take us," Jake declared, his voice unwavering despite the terror that gripped him. But our defiance was futile. The darkness closed in around us, the forest becoming a labyrinth of shadows and whispers that offered no refuge. The blood-stained footprints led us in circles, ensuring that we remained ensnared in the hunter's deadly game. As the night wore on, we felt ourselves slipping away, our spirits drained by the relentless assault of fear and sorrow. The figure loomed over us, its red eyes burning into our very souls. sealing our fate as part of the forest's dark legacy. When morning finally broke, the forest was silent once more. The clearing was empty, save for the blood-stained jacket and the gaping hole in the ground. The footprints had vanished, swallowed by the unforgiving snow. Our disappearance became just another legend whispered among the locals. A cautionary tale of the death road that claimed the lives of those who dared to uncover its secrets. Years have passed since that fateful winter, but the memory of that night lingers like a shadow, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lies hidden in the heart of the Alaskan wilderness. The Grand Oak Theater remains a symbol of resilience, but Pine Ridge stands as a testament to the enduring power of fear and the unforgiving embrace of the wild. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remote corners of Alaska, heed this warning. Respect the boundaries of the unknown. Honor the spirits of those who came before, and tread carefully, for in the heart of the frozen expanse, shadows linger, whispers echo, and malevolent forces wait to claim those who dare to uncover their secrets. Story number 5. The Hunter's House. I never believed in ghost stories. Growing up in the heart of Chicago, my nights were filled with the hum of the city rather than the whispers of the supernatural. But everything changed the winter I decided to leave the chaos behind and start anew in the remote wilderness of Alaska. The transition from skyscrapers to snow-covered pines was jarring yet invigorating. I purchased an old wooden house on the outskirts of a small, forgotten town nestled deep within the Alaskan forest. The house, though weathered and abandoned, exuded a rugged charm that promised solitude and peace. It was perfect for someone seeking to escape the relentless pace of urban life. The locals spoke little of the house, their eyes clouded with unspoken fears whenever the topic arose. They called it the Hunter's House, referencing the man who had vanished without a trace decades ago. Legend had it that he was an experienced hunter who braved the harshest winters, only to disappear during one particularly brutal storm. His cabin remained, untouched and cold, a silent monument to his mysterious fate. My first few weeks were blissful. I reveled in the tranquility, the crisp air, and the unending expanse of wilderness that stretched as far as the eye could see. Days were spent hiking, fishing, and cataloging the abundant wildlife. Nights, however, brought a different kind of silence, one that was almost oppressive in its stillness. It was during my 3rd month that I stumbled upon the Hunter's Journal while exploring the attic. The leather-bound book was fragile, its pages yellowed with age. Intrigued, I began to read, hoping to uncover the story behind the house's eerie reputation. The entries were meticulous, detailing the hunter's daily routines, his deep respect for the land, and his solitary adventures. But as I delved deeper, the tone shifted. The hunter wrote about strange noises at night, heavy footsteps on the roof, soft whispers carried by the wind, and unexplained flickering lights deep within the forest. His final entry was chilling. "They're coming." I closed the journal, a chill running down my spine. I dismissed it as the ramblings of a man succumbing to isolation. But that night, the house felt colder than usual. I lay in bed, the pages of the journal flipping in the drafty room, as I heard a distinct, deliberate knocking coming from the front door. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the door. The storm outside was fierce, the wind howling like a living thing, battering the house with relentless fury. I peered through the peephole but saw nothing, only the swirling snow and darkness beyond. I returned to my bedroom, trying to shake off the unease. The knocking persisted, louder now, echoing through the halls. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Panic set in as I realized I was utterly alone. Determined to confront whatever was outside, I armed myself with a sturdy flashlight and made my way to the front door. As I opened it, a gust of icy wind blasted into the house, extinguishing my flashlight and plunging me into darkness. I fumbled to relight it, my hands trembling uncontrollably. When the light flickered back to life, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing just beyond the threshold, tall and imposing, It wore a cloak that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its eyes glowed a faint, unnatural red, piercing through the storm with an intensity that rooted me to the spot. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice wavering. The figure remained silent, only letting out a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the house. I took a hesitant step forward, my courage wavering. "What do you want?" Without warning, the figure lunged, and I stumbled backward, crashing into the doorframe. It vanished as abruptly as it had appeared, leaving me breathless and terrified. I backed away, heart pounding, as the temperature in the room plummeted. Over the next few nights, the disturbances grew more intense. The footsteps became a nightly ritual, always stopping at the front door but never revealing their source. The whispers turned into anguished cries, echoing through the corridors, filling the house with an unbearable sorrow. One particularly harsh night, as the wind howled outside and the snow piled higher against the windows, I decided to investigate the source of the noises. Armed with a lantern, I descended into the basement, the air thick with must and decay. The basement was cluttered with old hunting gear, remnants of the past that spoke of a life once lived. As I explored, the flickering light revealed strange symbols etched into the walls. Symbols I couldn't decipher but felt were ancient and malevolent. My flashlight caught something else, a series of large, dark stains on the floor, drying under the dim light. Panic surged through me as I realized these were no ordinary marks. They looked like dried blood, but there was no sign of any injury in the basement. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The temperature dropped further, my breath visible in the icy air. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, casting eerie shadows that twisted and danced around me. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, filling the room with a cacophony of sorrow and rage. Suddenly, the basement door swung open, and the shadowy figure from the front door stood before me. Its red eyes bore into mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. "Leave," it whispered, its voice a chilling blend of sorrow and menace. "Or become part of the story." I backed away, stumbling over old boxes, my mind racing to find a way out. But the basement felt endless, a labyrinth of shadows and symbols that held me captive. The figure moved closer, his presence suffocating, as if the house itself was conspiring against me. Desperation took hold. I reached for the lantern, trying to fend off the darkness. But the figure was relentless. With a final, desperate push, I broke free from the basement's grip, sprinting up the stairs and into the warmth of the living room. The house seemed to come alive around me, the walls pulsating with an otherworldly energy, the symbols now a blazing red that illuminated the entire space. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, my mind unable to process the horrors I had witnessed. The front door creaked open once more, and the figure stepped inside, now a tangible presence that filled the room with an oppressive weight. "Why are you here?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. The figure tilted its head, eyes burning with an intensity that pierced my very soul. "They are coming," it intoned, the words echoing through the house like a death knell. Before I could respond, the house began to shake violently, the storm outside morphing into a tempest of supernatural fury. The windows shattered, and the snow was torn from the roof by unseen forces. The symbols on the walls flared with bright light, and the whispers became screams, filling every corner of the house with a cacophony of despair. In a last-ditch effort to survive, I grabbed the journal and tore out the final page. "They're coming," I read aloud, the words hanging heavy in the air. "What does it mean?" The figure moved closer, his presence overwhelming. "They are the lost," it whispered, "bound to this place, forever seeking release." As the house crumbled around me, I realized the truth. The hunter had not simply vanished. He had become part of the house's dark legacy, trapped in an eternal cycle of torment. The symbols were a binding spell, keeping the spirits of the lost from finding peace. With the house collapsing, I ran into the storm. The words, "they are coming," echoing in my mind. The forest around me was a blur of white and shadows. The storm now a tempest of supernatural wrath. I didn't stop running until the house was nothing but a distant, fading memory, swallowed by the wilderness. I never returned to Alaska, but the memory of the hunter's house haunts me still. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right and the northern lights flicker with an unnatural red hue, I hear the faint echoes of sorrow and rage, a reminder of the night I confronted the darkness that lurks in the heart of the wilderness. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remote corners of Alaska, heed this warning. Respect the boundaries of the unknown. Honor the spirits of those who came before, and tread carefully, for in the silence of the snow-covered forest, shadows linger, whispers echo, and malevolent forces wait to claim those who dare to uncover their secrets. Story number 6. The Stranger in the Shadows. I never believed in the supernatural. Growing up in Chicago, I was always more inclined toward logic and reason than ghost stories and haunted houses. But Alaska has a way of changing perspectives, especially when you find yourself alone in its vast, unforgiving wilderness. My name is Tom Miller, and a few years ago, I made the decision to leave behind the chaos of city life for the tranquility of solitude. I bought a small, weathered wooden house nestled deep within the Alaskan forest. Far from any semblance of civilization, the isolation was exactly what I needed, a place to escape, to find peace, and to reconnect with nature. The first few months were idyllic. I spent my days hiking through snow-covered trails, fishing in frozen streams, and enjoying the serene beauty that only Alaska can offer. But it was during the harsh winter months that the true test of my resolve began. It was mid-December, the kind of winter where the nights seemed endless and the snow fell relentlessly, burying the world in a thick, white blanket. I had settled into a comfortable routine, my evenings spent by the fireplace with a good book or tending to the small garden I managed to maintain despite the cold. Life was simple, and I was content. One particularly frigid night, as the wind howled outside and the snow piled higher against the windows, I was awakened by a persistent knocking sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, banging against the shutters and rattling the panes. But the knocking grew louder, more deliberate, echoing through the silent house. I sat up, pulling the covers tighter around me, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no response, just the relentless knocking, as if someone or something was trying to get inside. I glanced around the room, the shadows cast by the firelight dancing ominously on the walls. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed amplified in the dead of night. Summoning my courage, I decided to investigate, grabbing a flashlight and pulling on my thickest coat. I made my way to the front door. The snow outside was deep, making each step a laborious effort. The knocking continued, unabated. As I approached the entrance, I reached out and slowly turned the doorknob, the cold metal sending a shiver down my spine. The door swung open to reveal nothing but darkness. The night air was frigid, the wind whipping around me, but there was no one in sight. No footprints marked the snow leading to my door, no signs of anyone else having been there. I stood there, the flashlight beam piercing the darkness, searching for any clue as to who or what was trying to get in. But the street was empty, the snow muffling all sounds except the persistent knocking that now seemed to come from within the house itself. Confused and unnerved, I stepped back inside, closing the door firmly behind me. The knocking ceased as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind a heavy silence that pressed down on me. I locked the door, double-checking every window and entrance, but there was no sign of intrusion. Trying to shake off the feeling of unease, I returned to bed, telling myself it was just a trick of the wind or my imagination playing games. But as I lay there, the house felt colder, the shadows deeper. Sleep eluded me, replaced by a restless, anxious dread. The next morning, I awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the windows. As I stretched and began my morning routine, something caught my eye, a series of small, dark stains on the doorknob. My heart skipped a beat as I approached the door, shining the flashlight on the marks. Blood. Fresh blood. My breath caught in my throat as I examined the stains more closely. They were small, almost like scratches made with a fingernail. But there was no blood where the door met the frame, only on the handle itself. Panic surged through me. I had no idea how the blood got there. The door was locked from the inside, and I had no visitors the night before. My mind raced, trying to piece together what could have happened. Had I injured myself in my sleep? But I had no recollection of any struggle or accident. Determined to find answers, I decided to search the house for any signs of what might have caused the blood. I started with the basement, a place I rarely visited except for storage. As I descended the creaky stairs, the air grew colder, the darkness pressing in around me. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and forgotten belongings. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I reached the far corner. There, etched into the wooden wall, were strange symbols and markings, unlike anything I had ever seen before. The symbols seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, the lines sharp and jagged, forming a pattern that was both mesmerizing and horrifying. My flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows that made the symbols appear to move and shift. A chill ran down my spine as I realized these were not random markings. They looked deliberate, almost ritualistic. I reached out to touch one of the symbols, my fingers trembling, but recoiled as the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang. The basement plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the flickering flashlight in my hand. Frozen with fear, I stood there, the symbols now glowing faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with an oppressive presence, a feeling of being watched that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to move, to escape the basement, but my legs felt like lead, refusing to obey my commands. Then, out of the darkness, a voice whispered, barely audible yet unmistakably real, "Don't ignore the warnings." I spun around, shining the flashlight in the direction of the voice. But there was nothing there, no one. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the basement like a haunting melody. My heart pounded as I realized I was not alone. Gathering every ounce of courage, I forced myself to speak. "Who are you? What do you want?" Silence followed, the oppressive presence growing heavier. The symbols on the wall began to glow brighter, the red hues intensifying until they bathed the entire basement in a blood-red light. The symbols seemed to writhe and pulse, as if alive, moving in a sinister dance that mocked my fear. I stumbled backward, my mind racing to comprehend the situation. "This isn't real," I muttered to myself, trying to rationalize the inexplicable events unfolding before me. But the reality was undeniable. The basement was alive with malevolent energy, the symbols a testament to some dark force that had taken hold of the house. I knew I had to leave, to escape the basement and the horrors within. But my body wouldn't respond. The fear rooted me to the spot, paralyzed by the sheer terror of the unknown. Minutes, or was it hours, passed in agonizing silence. The symbols continued to glow, the voice whispering again, louder this time, "Leave now, before it's too late." Desperation surged through me as I finally managed to break free from the paralysis. I bolted up the stairs, sprinting through the house as the oppressive presence seemed to follow, manifesting in the shadows and darkness that clung to every corner. The front door swung open by itself, as if inviting me to flee, but the sight that greeted me was anything but welcoming. Outside, the snow had piled up against the door, creating a barrier that made it nearly impossible to open. The storm had intensified, the wind howling like a living entity, driving the snow into a frenzied dance around me. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but my cries were lost in the chaos of the storm. Turning away from the door, I noticed a faint glow in the distance, an aurora borealis that usually signaled a breathtaking natural wonder. But tonight, the lights were different. They flickered with an unsettling red hue, casting an eerie glow over the snow-covered landscape. As I watched, the lights seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, their colors shifting and swirling in unnatural patterns. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing, its form barely discernible against the storm's fury. As it approached, the red eyes of the being became clear, burning with an unholy light that pierced through the darkness. My blood ran cold as I realized that the creature from the basement had found its way outside, his presence overwhelming and malevolent. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. The figure didn't respond with words. Instead, it raised a hand, pointing toward the house, its gesture both accusatory and commanding. I backed away, my instincts screaming at me to run, to escape the nightmare that had unfolded in my isolated sanctuary. But the storm was too fierce, the snow too deep. The figure advanced, its movements slow and deliberate, each step sending a jolt of terror through my body. I could feel its gaze upon me, the red eyes burning into my soul, demanding something I couldn't comprehend. "Leave now," it seemed to say, its presence a constant reminder of the darkness that had taken hold of the house. Desperation and fear drove me to flee, my feet pounding against the snow as I ran deeper into the forest. The storm raged around me, the wind howling like a banshee's scream, but all I could hear was the echo of my own fear. The red aurora flickered above, casting twisted shadows that danced and warped, creating illusions that made the forest seem alive with malevolent intent. I stumbled through the snow, the cold biting into my skin, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house loomed in my mind's eye, the symbols and the creature's red eyes haunting my every step. I knew I had to find shelter, to seek help, but the forest was an endless maze of darkness and, note, if you ever find yourself isolated in the Alaskan wilderness, far from the safety of civilization, remember the tale of the last inn. Respect the boundaries of the unknown. Heed the warnings of those who came before, and tread carefully. For in the heart of the frozen expanse, shadows linger, whispers echo, and malevolent forces wait to claim those who dare to cross their path. Story number 7. The Shadow on the Summit. I never imagined that moving away from the chaos of the city would lead me to the most harrowing experience of my life. But there we were, a family of 4, nestled in a remote wooden house perched atop a desolate Alaskan peak. The decision to relocate was born out of desperation for peace, a sanctuary away from the incessant noise and relentless pace of urban living. Little did we know, the silence of the wilderness harbored its own sinister secrets. The house was a relic from a bygone era, its sturdy timber walls standing resilient against the biting cold and howling winds. Surrounded by towering pines and blanketed in perpetual snow, it seemed the perfect escape. My wife, Laura, our teenage daughter, Emma, and our young son, Jake, were all eager to embrace this new chapter. The first few weeks were idyllic. Quiet mornings with the sunrise casting golden hues over the snow, afternoons spent exploring the pristine wilderness, and evenings by the fireplace, sharing stories and laughter. But as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, an unsettling tension began to weave its way into our lives. It started subtly, a creak in the floorboards, the distant howl of a wolf, shadows that danced just beyond the reach of our lantern light. We dismissed these as the natural sounds of the wild, nothing more than the eerie ambience of our new home. Then came the first night. It was a particularly frigid evening, the wind howling with an intensity that rattled the windows and sent shivers down our spines. We had settled into our sleeping bags, the warmth of the fire barely keeping the cold at bay. Suddenly, a heavy thud echoed from above us, the sound unmistakable. Footsteps, deliberate and weighted, resonated through the roof. Laura stirred, her eyes wide with concern. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, clutching Jake closer. I nodded, my heart pounding. probably just the wind, I reassured her, though the rational part of my mind struggled to deny the growing unease. Emma, ever the curious one, peeked out from her sleeping bag, her gaze fixed on the ceiling. The footsteps continued, now accompanied by a faint scratching sound that seemed to scrape against the wooden beams. Fear gnawed at me as I lay there, listening to the relentless rhythm above. The sounds stopped as abruptly as they had started, leaving behind a suffocating silence that pressed in on all sides. We tried to return to sleep, but the unease lingered, seeping into our dreams like a dark, persistent fog. The following nights brought no respite. Each evening, as darkness settled over the peak, the footsteps returned, each time more persistent, more ominous. We would hear them hours into the night, the sound reverberating through the house like a relentless drumbeat. No matter how many times we checked, no matter how thoroughly we searched, there was no sign of anyone or anything up there. One particularly stormy night, as the wind howled like a living thing and snow battered the windows with merciless fury, the true horror unfolded. We were gathered around the fireplace, seeking comfort in each other's presence when Laura pointed to the window. "Look," she whispered, her voice trembling. Through the blinding white of the snowstorm, a large, dark silhouette stood outside our window. It was human-like but distorted, an imposing figure with elongated limbs and an absence of discernible features. Its presence was unnerving. Its eyes, if they could be called that, glowing an unnatural red that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Emma gasped, clutching her blanket tightly. "What is that?" Before anyone could respond, the figure began to move, its movements slow and deliberate as it approached the window. I felt an overwhelming urge to run, to protect my family from this unknown threat. But my body refused to obey. The figure stopped just inches away from the glass. Its red eyes locked onto mine, filling me with a paralyzing fear. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, melting into the swirling snowstorm. The window was left icy cold, a stark reminder of the nightmare that had just unfolded. The next morning, we awoke to a horrifying sight. Where the window once stood, now lay a series of gigantic handprints etched into the frost, surrounding the frame in a grotesque pattern. Each print was larger than any human hand, the lines deep and jagged as if clawed into the ice by something with immense strength. "Who or what was that?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could only shake my head. The images of the red-eyed figure seared into my mind. We spent the day in a state of anxious vigilance, checking every corner of the house, searching for answers that seemed just out of reach. As the winter deepened, so did the mystery. The footsteps persisted, relentless and unyielding, each night bringing with it new signs of an unseen presence. We found marks, large, unidentifiable footprints, etched into the snow surrounding our home, circling the house in a constant loop that offered no escape. One evening, determined to uncover the truth, I decided to venture onto the roof, armed with a sturdy flashlight and a sense of resolve. The wind was howling outside, the snow swirling in a frenzied dance, making visibility near impossible. Climbing up was a struggle, the roof slick with ice and snow, each step perilous. Reaching the peak, I shone my light across the expanse of white. There, in the midst of the storm, stood the dark silhouette once more. This time, it was clearer, an immense figure with hollow eyes, staring down at me with an intensity that felt almost accusatory. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking but determined. The figure remained silent, his presence oppressive and heavy. I took a step closer, the wind threatening to knock me off balance. As I approached, the figure began to morph, its form distorting and stretching into something more monstrous, more terrifying. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as the figure reached out with elongated, clawed hands, its red eyes blazing brighter in the darkness. I stumbled backward, desperate to escape, but the figure moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between us in an instant. I woke up with a start, the memory of the encounter vivid in my mind. My heart raced as I realized it had all been a nightmare. Or had it? The fear lingered, a constant reminder that something malevolent was watching us, waiting. The final straw came one frigid night when the storm outside was at its fiercest. The wind howled with an almost sentient rage, and the snow piled higher against the windows, trapping us in a frozen prison. As we sat huddled together, seeking comfort in our unity, the house began to shake, the walls groaning under the weight of the storm. A loud crash echoed from the basement, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps pounding the floor. Laura and I exchanged terrified glances before racing down the stairs, Emma and Jake following close behind. The basement was dark, the air thick with the scent of damp and decay. As we reached the bottom, the sound of footsteps stopped abruptly. The room was empty, save for a series of strange, intricate symbols etched into the walls and floor, glowing faintly with an eerie red light. The symbols pulsed with a sinister energy, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to writhe and twist of their own accord. "What is this?" Emma whispered, eyes wide with fear. Before anyone could respond, the basement door slammed shut, plunging us into darkness. The symbols began to glow brighter, the red light intensifying until it filled the entire room. The temperature plummeted, our breaths visible in the frigid air. A voice, deep and hollow, resonated through the basement, echoing off the walls with a chilling finality. "Do not ignore the warnings." The symbols started to move, shifting and rearranging themselves into the shape of the figure we had seen on the roof. His hollow eyes seemed to follow us, his presence oppressive and unavoidable. The realization hit me like a freight train. We were dealing with something ancient, something that had claimed this land long before we arrived. Panic and determination battled within me as I grabbed Laura's hand, pulling her toward the door. "We have to leave," I urged, but the door remained firmly shut, the symbols blocking our escape. Desperation set in as the figure began to emerge from the shadows, its form solidifying into the terrifying shape we had come to fear. Its red eyes bore into us, a silent judgment that chilled us to the core. "Leave now," it whispered, its voice a haunting melody that resonated within our very souls. "Or join us in eternal silence." Summoning every ounce of courage, I pushed against the door, which finally gave way, allowing us to flee back upstairs. The house seemed to come alive around us, the walls pulsating with the same red energy, the shadows growing deeper and more menacing. We ran out into the storm, the house shrouded in darkness behind us. The footprints we had followed earlier now seemed like a grotesque path, leading us away from the nightmare that had consumed us. But the figures were relentless, their hollow eyes watching our every move as we fled into the endless white wilderness. When morning finally broke, the storm had passed, leaving behind a serene, snow-covered landscape. The wooden house stood silent and imposing, the secrets buried beneath layers of snow and time. We were alive, but forever changed by the horrors we had witnessed. Years have passed since that harrowing winter, but the memories remain vivid, etched into my mind like the gigantic handprints that once marked our windows. Pine Ridge has returned to its quiet existence, the echoes of our ordeal fading into whispered legends among the locals. But sometimes, when the wind howls just right and the northern lights shimmer with an unsettling red hue, I catch a glimpse of something watching from the darkness, a reminder that some places hold secrets too dark to be unveiled, and some shadows are best left undisturbed. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remote peaks of Alaska, heed this warning. Respect the boundaries of the wilderness. Honor the spirits of those who came before, and tread carefully, for in the heart of the frozen expanse, there are forces that watch, wait, and hunger for more than just sustenance. They hunger for your very soul.